Welcome back to another edition of Maryland Family Matters. It is my great privilege to welcome to the podcast today Liana Graham. Liana is a marriage and family apologist and a Gen Z influencer. And we're just so delighted, Liana, that you have decided to join us on our podcast today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor, and I'm excited to, get into all the fun details.
So, tell us a little bit about your story. Where did you grow up? What's your background, and how did you get to the DMV area?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna try my best to give you the Sparks Notes version because it is a long story. But I was born in the United States, but my parents moved to Canada when I was really young. So I grew up in Ontario, and went to public school for my basically my entire life. So I received a standard public education, a la Canadiana, and definitely was not the bastion of conservatism by any means. And in elementary school, I actually became extraordinarily progressive because of that. Like, I would attribute that shift to the fact that I went to public school and also the fact that I was given a phone at a very young age. So I was on social media, I was on Tumblr. So at
Hmm.
around like grade 7, I became really, really progressive. I had short hair. It was dyed pink. I
Ah,
kind of checked off all the stereotypical boxes. And it's kind of a long story about how exactly this happened, but gradually, when I went to high school, I started embracing a bit more conservative values. The first thing that changed my mind, or the first position I changed my mind on, was the abortion issue. And
hmm,
there were some pro-life protesters or advocates, I guess you could say, outside of our school, my high school. They were holding up signs, and it was just like the exchange between them and the students that really shifted my perspective on conservatism. They
mhm,
were just so kind and gracious in their
hmm.
decorum. And the people who I was friends with, were just like yelling at them with such
Yeah.
vitriol. Like they were literally like out of breath with their anger. And I think
Hmm.
I just, when I was a progressive, I thought that conservatives like genuinely hated other people and
Hmm.
leftists and people in the communities that I ascribed to. But when I experienced that, I realized that that wasn't the case. And so
Hmm.
I slowly became very conservative, and I just became the exact opposite of who I was in grade 7 and 8. I was like the standard student in English class who was debating all the people about Donald Trump building the wall. And we're in Canada,
Yeah.
so it's like, why does everybody care about this? But every English teacher in the world cares about Donald Trump. Doesn't matter if they're not in the United States, is what I learned in high
Yeah.
school. But during the COVID pandemic, I was confronted with sort of, I guess, with a lot of people had a similar experience, but kind of going through sort of existential questions about my life and my purpose. And although I was conservative in some sense of the word, I hadn't considered sort of the underlying religious foundation of the worldview that I started to align myself with. So
Hmm.
during the COVID pandemic, that's when I started really considering Christianity. I started reading the
Hmm.
Bible, and it was after reading the Gospel of John that I became a
Hmm.
Christian. I
Wow.
remember actually months before I started in the book of Genesis. I couldn't
Yeah.
understand anything. And it's like, yeah, no
Right.
kidding. You started in the book of Genesis.
Right.
And then I read the Gospel of John. And it also says in that same gospel, my sheep hear my voice.
Hmm.
So that's exactly really what happened when I was reading, the gospel in my room at 16 years old. So I had like your standard conversion story, like Jesus was accepted into my heart. And I
Yeah.
became sort of a social media influencer after that. I started posting a lot of Christian content,
Hmm.
and it was through that content that my husband and I met. We knew each other from like high school mutual friend groups. We're from the same small town, or yeah, city in Canada. But through the content that I was posting, he was interested in learning more about the Christian faith. So I always tell people when I say this story, I promise this was not like a moment of flirt to convert. But what
Ah,
happened is that we became very close friends through
yeah.
apologetics and evangelism. And over
Hmm.
time, he became a Christian. And then after he became a Christian, we started dating. And
Wow.
so I approached like going into university applications with two main things in mind. One, I wanted to receive a Christian education, which I like didn't have for all of my life, and also a
Yeah.
conservative education. But I also was trying to prepare myself for marriage because at that point, my husband and I were dating for a few months. And I think there was a moment a few months in where we both knew, okay, like we really do love each other. And we were intentional with guiding our relationship towards marriage, but also
Mm,
practical in figuring out what exactly that looked like. And he was at a university about 5 hours away. So we were long distance for about 4 years. And honestly, praise God for that, because we were able to mature so much in our own Christian
mm.
communities, at our own churches. We were both such new Christians that we really grew and developed personally and intellectually in that time. But
So
sorry, you can continue. Yeah.
yeah. So just let me put a little
Uh
bookmark
huh.
in that a little bit and ask a question.
Hmm.
As you sort of grew up and then became a Christian, started dating this boy that who also was a young Christian. Um, I mean, at what point did you decide that you were going to pursue marriage? Um, and then what was the response of the people around you? I'm thinking of your own family, older aunts and uncles maybe, or older influences, and also your peers.
Yeah, that is a great question. Well, I knew that Zach and I knew we wanted to get married pretty early, and the way that we knew is actually just because we knew we loved each other. So
Mm,
once it dawned upon me that I loved him and he loved me, and I guess love is kind of one of those difficult things to articulate, but the way I define it is glad assumption of sacrifice. So in the face of fear
mm,
tells us to cave in the presence of risk, but love tells us to jump into the risk, and embrace it
mm,
for the sake of another, and embrace dependency upon another. And I think the moment I realized Zach and I loved each other, because we were integrating our Christian faith into our lives, it just became a natural consideration once we knew we loved each other that we should pursue marriage. It was more just like us applying our Christian convictions, because we knew that to pursue this relationship, it was godly to get married, and it was a natural desire. So that was kind
What
of
what
it. Like,
what a contrast to sort of the worldly one of the worldly sort of ways of looking at dating, which is
mm,
almost recreational, almost like kind of having a good time or, or even not wanting to be alone. I mean, this sounds like a very different kind of animal you were pursuing.
yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's experienced it would know that the idea that dating can just be casual is ridiculous. And I actually saw an actor say this on like Alex Cooper's podcast, which is hilarious, because obviously she is certainly a proponent of exactly that kind of lifestyle, like approaching relationships and even sexual relationships in a very casual, blasé way. And this actor, who also is like by no means very conservative, said like, "Yeah, you think people can be casual in dating? Show me one example." Like, show me one example of
Um,
somebody doing that who's like, whose heart doesn't get broken or it doesn't
yeah.
get messy and complicated. And it's like, yeah, because it is complicated, because you're not dealing with just like some sort of biological urge. You're dealing with something deeper than that, something supernatural, something
Mm,
deeply human, and also a manifestation of our creatureliness. I would say that love and marriage is one of the most unique comforts for creaturely beings who desire, above all else, community and relationships.
yeah.
And that is such a distinctly human trait. Like, we were created for relationship with God, but also for relationship with others. And it doesn't matter if you don't get married, like, you will still desire that your whole life. And you can definitely realize that in a number of different ways. Like, for sure, you can have friend groups, you can have church communities, and there are some people who never get married and still live fulfilling lives. Christ himself didn't get married. So
Hmm.
obviously you don't need marriage to be fulfilled, but what you do need is relationship. And it's
Hmm.
very clear too that marriage is a very unique comfort for those who desire relationship, in that it is exclusive and it is lifelong. It's supposed to be permanent. Like, unlike every other social relationship that is defined by kind of a more the merrier attitude, right? The more
Yeah.
people, the better. It's inclusive. Marriage is unique in that it is exclusive. And I
Yeah.
think like the seriousness with which you approach it, and marriage as an institution exists to honor and to reflect that it's two people coming together for life in this
Hmm.
exclusive union.
Hmm.
And part of that is like you're forsaking all others to
Hmm.
cleave to one another. So you need that contract, you need that public testimony to have that be like a valid thing. Otherwise, it's just like, as you said, it's casual. And
Yeah.
there's no assurance of true commitment. So I would say that yeah, we learned that we wanted to get married then, and that's why we wanted to get married. It's applying that our Christian principles. Now, in terms of how people responded to
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely there was a lot of pushback on both of for both of us, mainly
Mm.
from people in his life because my husband was not raised in a Christian environment. I was raised in a more sort of nominally Christian environment because my parents are both Romanian immigrants. And so they come from a very culturally Christian culture that
Yeah.
is very traditional, even if a lot of people aren't really practicing Christians. And it was still normal for people back home in Romania to get home pretty young. So my
Yeah.
family wasn't very opposed to the
Hmm.
idea of me getting married young. They just wanted to ensure that I was mature enough to make that decision. And obviously, I believe in getting married young, but I also don't think marriage is something to be taken lightly. So you've got to basically walk that tightrope and make sure you're acknowledging both realities there. But my husband
Yeah.
didn't come from that culture and that sort of family. And I think there was a lot of fear that what we were doing was like throwing away our future, that we were being
Yeah.
naive. I can't even tell you how many times we heard that our prefrontal cortex wasn't fully developed. By the way, it
Yeah.
still isn't. I still have 2 years to go on that front. Okay. And I think I'm doing pretty fine. But yeah, our prefrontal cortexes are not yet fully developed.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
therefore, we can't trust ourselves to make decisions that will have an impact on us for the rest of our lives. What's funny is that that criticism actually implies the view of marriage I just articulated, that it's sort of this lifelong thing. If it's just a casual thing, I don't know why it would be such a problem. But I
Yeah.
think that there's still this cultural expectation that marriage is a lifelong
Yeah.
thing. It's really
Yeah.
just radicals who kind of espouse the alternative views, but I think deep down most people have these intuitions. And so yeah, we had a lot of pushback, mainly on the front that we were too young and too naive
Yeah.
and that we would
Yeah.
regret it later on.
Yeah.
And there was also, for me as a woman, I heard a lot of people tell me that I was basically going to waste my potential.
Yeah.
I was always very argumentative, very extroverted as a young kid. I was told, I don't even remember from how young, that I should be a litigator. Like, you should go to law school,
Yeah.
you should become an
Sure.
academic, like, you're so good at speaking. Which, fine. I mean, thank you, I suppose. But it's honestly a little bit offensive to imply that those skills and talents would be wasted in a home. If anything, I
Yeah.
think, isn't it a great idea to transfer those gifts over to the next generation? And if I have kids of
Mm.
my own, to teach them those skills and to utilize those skills to create amazing citizens, like to create
Yeah.
amazing, virtuous people. That I think is probably of more benefit to society than just like slaving away in like a corporate job. I don't really
Yeah.
understand what, anyways, all that to say, I heard that a lot. And I heard a lot of people tell me, like, at least when you get married, at least wait a few years to have kids. Like, don't
Yeah.
waste your life, don't waste your potential. So there was
Mm.
all of this concern about one, being too naive, being too young, but also just wasting our
Mm.
lives by tying ourselves down to something and basically in that way limiting ourselves and not being able to experience like the fullness that your 20s has to offer, which is apparently like endless hookups and traveling the world and also like climbing a career ladder for some
Yeah.
sort of promotion by 25. Like, great, good for you guys, you did it. So
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting how the response to your personal decision now kind of exposes the culture's view of this subject, and
mm,
which brings me to one of the ways you describe yourself, which is a marriage and family apologist. I think the apologist word is interesting. Unfortunately, I think our culture is apologizing for these things, whereas you want to defend these things. I dare to say most Gen Z women, 23 years old or 24, I don't know how old you are, but would not embrace that title to describe themselves. Why do you embrace that title?
So I embrace that title, number one, because I studied philosophy in school. So
Ah,
we learned about the importance of apologetics, which, as you've noted, is very different from apologizing. Comes from the Greek word, I think it's Greek, apologia, which means to defend, and it's the same word used, I'm pretty sure, in 1 Peter 3:15, that we're always called to have a to share the hope that is within us, to defend the hope that is within us. So
right.
apologetics is really just the art of utilizing argumentation and rhetoric to defend a particular viewpoint or worldview. And
Mhm.
Christians do that very often. And in fact, when I became a social media influencer, the first kind of video content I produced was Christian. A lot of it was Christian apologetics. And I studied philosophy in school. So a lot of it was just these niche abstract conversations in like meta ethics and epistemology. But as I consumed more social media content and I got more engaged in policy and cultural conversations, I became very passionate about the marriage and family issue, partly
Yeah.
also obviously because of my own personal experience. And something I realized was a lot of the Instagram videos and TikTok videos that were popular online subtly assumed certain philosophical ideas without explicitly articulating them. And the
Mm.
difficulty is that a lot of young people are susceptible to those ideas because they haven't developed the tools to identify them and to refute
Yeah.
them. And so I think
Mm.
the danger of social media as an influence that tends towards marriage skepticism is twofold. On the one hand, the substance of the messaging is obviously hostile to marriage and family, and I don't think I need to list off a laundry list of examples to make that point. We all know that that's true. But second
Yeah.
of all, it's not just in the content itself, but the way it's said. It's
Mm.
usually in these very, very short clips that you don't
Yeah.
really have much time to think about. You just scroll mindlessly, and when you scroll mindlessly, there is the risk that the ideas that are packaged in these trends start to take root in your own mind. So the
Yeah.
reason why I identify as an apologist in this sense is one, I learned to engage in this art of apologetics in school, but I also see the specific risk that young women are exposed to on social media by being fed these trends without understanding what are these trends implying about your life or implying about your identity. So
Mm.
one example of this is I saw a video, it went really viral a few years ago of a woman. She looked very disheveled, she was very emotional, and she was saying like she just had a child, and her entire message in the video was not to have kids. She literally said
Mm.
that. I just had a kid, and let me tell you girls, don't have kids. I'm telling you, it's not worth it. Save yourself,
Mm.
save your freedom. I will never be the same. And I
Yeah.
remember when I watched this video, all the comments were like, wow, like she's really got a point. And they really thought because she was sharing from her own personal experience that she was an authoritative figure and that they should listen to her. Sorry,
This
I don't know.
she was authentic. She
Yes,
shared
authentic.
authentic. Yeah. Mhm.
Hmm. And what they didn't realize is while she was sharing a personal experience, she was filtering it through a perspective on personal identity or the purpose of her life. And so I remember watching the video, breaking it down. I actually made a YouTube video about this, explaining, like, actually, there were some philosophical assumptions being made in this video.
Yeah.
One of the assumptions she made was the limitations that the baby imposed on her ability to travel was a
Yeah.
limitation on her identity. And it's like, whoa,
Mm.
whoa, 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 let's back up. That's a very, very bold claim. What does that actually mean? And before we filmed, right, we were talking about Carl Trueman and the rise and
Yeah.
triumph of the modern self. That is expressive individualism that he talks about in this book. The idea that your authentic self, your identity is it's to express this inner essence of who you are. Like it's not tied to relationship, it's not tied to something external. It's entirely internal, it's entirely self-defined. And the thing that expresses that is absolute autonomy. Because if it's based upon your own personal subjective evaluation, what facilitates that expression? Well, maximum ability, maximum choices to oh, if I want to wake up one day and travel to Bermuda because my authentic self tells me so, I should. So therefore, any sort
Yeah.
of external limitation imposed by duties and responsibilities given to you by your relationships would be a limitation not just on certain aspects of your life, on your identity. That
Yeah.
is a very, very different claim altogether. And I realized people were just accepting this without understanding the underlying mechanisms or the philosophical assumptions being made. Now, once those are outlined, maybe somebody might say, you know what? I still believe in it. I believe in this very new, very abstract, very vague theory of the self. Okay, you might believe that. And then we can talk about why there are issues I take with it. But the very fact alone that so many people adopt these ideas without understanding what they're assuming about your identity, about human freedom, about human purpose, I think it's very harmful to society. And it leads to this sort of mass, influencing mass amounts of young women towards being skeptical of marriage and family. So, and what's interesting is that we now know through research, like IFS has done research on this, that roughly a third of women believe that marriage and children will lead to lifetime happiness. Only a third. So
Mm.
most young women believe that marriage and family is actually going to be harmful to their future happiness, whereas the data actually shows the opposite. So there's a gap between what women think marriage and family will offer them and what marriage and family actually seems to be offering women. And then the big question researchers are asking is, why is there this discrepancy? Like, why do people feel so pessimistic about marriage and family when the reality shows that marriage and family is actually so beneficial for your lifetime happiness? And obviously, there are a lot of factors and theories, but I think one of the main issues is social media messaging and culture, which is why, obviously, I mean, I work in policy. I think policy is an important avenue to pursue. But I also think because cultural messaging has played such an important role, there need to be more people on social media doing the apologetics and showing people there is a better path, and that the assumptions made in these trends are philosophically dubious at best.
So let's put a pause right there, Liana, in our conversation, and we're going to pick this up the next time. My guest today has been Liana Graham, a marriage and family apologist and influencer. Liana, hang on, and we'll continue our conversation next week, and we'll answer a lot of those questions. I want to apply a lot of what you said to how Christians can live and how we should think about some of these cultural and policy issues. Thank you, Liana, for being our guest, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.